Isolation is a killer. And in Colorado, the vast, empty spaces don't just separate cities, they hide the crimes that redefine human darkness. Imagine a town so cursed, they plowed over 2,000 bodies to build a park. Imagine a killer so methodical, he murdered entire families with their own axe, washed the blood, and simply vanished on a midnight train. Tonight, we journey through the chilling history of a state built on secrets. We'll explore the Riverdale Road, where a mansion burned down with a whole family trapped inside, and the cold reality of Alferd Packer, the only American ever convicted of cannibalism. Lock your doors and dim the lights, because we are diving deep into the 5 forgotten stories that prove the mountains are far more dangerous than you think. Before we get started, hit the like button if you dare to know the truth, and let's begin this terrifying countdown. The American West was built on a simple promise: opportunity, gold in the streams, silver in the hills, and the freedom to seize it all. It was a promise of a new life, a grand adventure. But the mountains of Colorado were not forgiving. They had a way of stripping a man down, layer by layer, stripping away his wealth, his hope, his sanity, and sometimes his very humanity. This is the story of Alferd Packer, the only American ever formally convicted of cannibalism-related charges. A name that, in Colorado, is synonymous with desperation, betrayal, and a horror so profound it earned him the chilling title, the Colorado Cannibal. Alferd G. Packer was born in Pennsylvania in 1842. He was a restless, sickly man, prone to epileptic seizures that led to his discharge from the Union Army twice during the Civil War. He was, by all accounts, a nobody, a failed shoemaker, a petty thief, and a drifter. He had the get-rich-quick disease that swept the nation, drawing him west in search of a gold fortune that would legitimize his life. In 1873, he joined a ragtag group of 20 prospectors in Utah, all eager to reach the new gold strikes in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado Territory. Packer, with his tall tales and dubious claims, convinced a subset of these men that he was a guide, promising a direct, secret route. He was a self-proclaimed expert, leading a group of sheep to the slaughter. By late January 1874, the larger party was starving, frozen, and demoralized. They staggered into the winter camp of the Ute Chief Ouray, near present-day Montrose. The Ute people, against their own wisdom, showed the white men boundless charity, offering food and shelter. Chief Ouray, a wise man who knew the mountain's wrath, issued a grave warning. Do not go into the mountains. Stay here until spring. To venture out now is to die. Most of the party listened, but 5 men, spurred by impatience and greed, refused. They decided to trust Alferd Packer, the man who claimed to know a shortcut, a route that would save them weeks and deliver them to riches before anyone else. The men who followed Packer into the frozen wilderness were Israel Swan, the oldest, rumored to be carrying several $1,000s in cash; James Humphrey, a respected miner who carried the group's best rifle; Frank Miller, a German butcher by trade. An ironic detail that would later haunt the case. George Noon, a young boy, only a teenager, heading west for adventure. Shannon Wilson Bell, a red-haired, outspoken man who quickly came to distrust Packer. On February 9, 1874, the 6 men, scantily clad, critically short on rations, and with no snowshoes for the immense drifts, turned their backs on the safety of Chief Ouray's camp and plunged into the merciless San Juans. They vanished. For 66 days, the mountains held them. 66 days of howling blizzards, temperatures plunging far below zero, and the creeping, agonizing torture of starvation. The men quickly lost the trail. They became disoriented. They were reduced to boiling and eating their moccasins, chewing on tree bark, and subsisting on a few frozen rosebuds. Then, on April 16, 1874, the mountains coughed up one survivor. Alferd Packer stumbled into the Los Pinos Indian Agency near Saguache, Colorado. He was a spectral vision, haggard, worn, but surprisingly well fed. His clothing was tattered, but he looked too hardy for a man who had survived 2 months of unimaginable starvation. He carried a Winchester rifle that belonged to James Humphrey, a skinning knife belonging to another man, and a surprisingly large amount of cash. His initial story was simple. He'd become separated from his party during a blizzard. He survived by eating rabbits and rosebuds. The others were simply lost. But the story didn't hold up. The men at the agency, who knew starvation when they saw it, were immediately suspicious of Packer's physique and his sudden prosperity. He was spending money freely at the local saloon, buying rounds of drinks, and flashing a $70 horse. Where did a starving man get a $70 horse? When confronted by Indian agent Charles Adams and a few members of the original Utah party, Packer's composure began to crack. He admitted to a dark, terrible truth. He confessed that they had run out of food, and in a moment of terrifying, tearful honesty, he uttered the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. It would not be the first time that people had been obliged to eat each other when they were hungry. His first official confession, coerced by Agent Adams, was a gruesome tale of necessity. He claimed that the oldest member, Israel Swan, was the first to die from exposure and starvation. The 5 survivors ate him. Then 3 more died, one after another, and were consumed by the shrinking circle of survivors. Finally, only Packer and Shannon Bell remained. Packer claimed that a desperately hungry Bell had gone completely insane and lunged at him with a hatchet. Packer, in self-defense, was forced to shoot Bell. Alone, surrounded by the corpses of his last meal, Packer confessed that he was forced to subsist on Bell's body for the next 2 weeks until he found his way out. The city was horrified. Packer was arrested and jailed in Saguache, but before he could be brought to a formal trial, on a dark night in August, he escaped. He changed his name to John Schwartze and vanished into the anonymity of the American frontier for nearly 9 years. The story might have ended there, a simple tale of survival cannibalism. But it didn't. On a warm day in August 1874, a traveling artist named John A. Randolph, who was sketching in the area, came upon a dreadful sight on the slopes of Slumgullion Pass, near Lake City. It was a secluded campsite by a creek. There, beneath a low-hanging tree, were the remains of the 5 missing men. The bodies were not scattered along a trail, as Packer had claimed. They were grouped together. And they had not died of simple starvation or exposure. The site was a scene of savage, premeditated slaughter. The skeletal remains bore the brutal evidence. Skulls were shattered. All 5 bodies had been repeatedly struck by a hatchet. The wounds were not consistent with a quick, desperate fight. They were methodical, designed to kill with crushing finality. And then, the gruesome detail that turned mere suspicion into certain horror. Strips of flesh had been cleanly cut from the torsos and limbs. It wasn't the clumsy work of a man fighting for survival. It was the precise, calculated butchery of a man provisioning for the long winter. Frank Miller, the German butcher, was found with his skull split open, his body the most extensively mutilated. The killer was clearly skilled with a knife. The discovery immediately rendered Packer's confession a lie. He had not merely survived on the dead, he had systematically murdered them. 9 years later, in 1883, Packer was finally tracked down and arrested in Wyoming after one of the original Utah prospectors, Frenchy Cabazon, recognized his high, squeaky laugh in a saloon. Brought back to Lake City for trial, Packer offered his second and, most famous, confession. This version was an even more elaborate self-defense narrative. In this telling, he claimed that he had gone out searching for the trail. When he returned, he found a scene of carnage. Shannon Bell, completely insane from hunger, had murdered the other 4 with a hatchet and was actively boiling their flesh over the campfire. When Packer approached, Bell charged him with the hatchet raised. Packer shot him twice in the abdomen and killed him. He was the victim. He was the hero. He was the one who stopped the murder, and then only resorted to cannibalism out of absolute dire necessity. But the jury did not believe him. The visual evidence of the crime scene, the grouping of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, the methodical butchery spoke louder than any confession. In 1883, Alferd Packer was found guilty of premeditated murder. The pronouncement by Judge M.M. B. Gary became the stuff of legend. Though the famous quote involving the Seven Democrats is likely apocryphal, the official sentence was chilling enough. Alferd Packer, the judgment of this court is that you be removed from hence to the jail of Hinsdale County, and that on said 19th day of May, 1883, you be taken from thence by the sheriff of Hinsdale County to a place of execution prepared for this purpose, and there hung by the neck until you are dead, 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 and may God have mercy on your soul. Packer was sentenced to hang. He dodged the noose on a technicality, won a retrial, and in 1886 was convicted of 5 counts of voluntary manslaughter, earning him a 40-year sentence in the Cannon City Penitentiary. He served 17 years. The modern twist to this gruesome tale is the enduring doubt. In 1989, a forensic team exhumed the remains of the 5 victims for a scientific study. The results, though inconclusive for a modern courtroom, lent some credence to Packer's second story. 3 of the skulls had major hatchet wounds, consistent with Bell's supposed rampage. But 2 other bodies, one being that of Shannon Bell, had wounds that were more complex, suggesting a chaotic struggle. The bodies were indeed cannibalized. The forensics do not definitively prove that Packer killed all 5, but they do confirm a horrific, violent struggle occurred and that the man who survived was a cannibal. Alferd Packer was paroled in 1901 thanks to a sympathetic campaign by a local journalist. He moved to Littleton, Colorado, where he worked as a guard for the Denver Post and, ironically, maintained a quiet life, reportedly even becoming a vegetarian. He died in 1907, carrying the dark secret of the San Juans to his grave. To this day, the area where the men perished is marked on maps. The nearby wilderness area is known as Cannibal Plateau, and the legend of Alferd Packer, the man who crossed the final dark line in his struggle for survival, remains the most notorious and most grotesque chapter in Colorado history. It is a cautionary tale of how quickly civilization can be stripped away and how close the savage wilderness, both outside and inside a man, truly lies. We have a name for the monster that hides in the dark. We call him the boogeyman. We tell ourselves he isn't real. He is a child's story, a shadow in the corner of the eye, a primitive fear of the dark that we, as modern, civilized people, have long since outgrown. We live in lighted cities, behind locked doors. We are safe. In 1911, the residents of Colorado Springs believed they were safe too. Colorado Springs, at the turn of the 20th century, was not a rugged, frontier outpost. It was the city of sunshine, a genteel, wealthy, and pious health resort nestled at the foot of Pikes Peak. It was a place of tuberculosis sanitariums, grand hotels, and clean, wide avenues. It was a city of progress and civility. But in the autumn of 1911, Colorado Springs learned that the boogeyman is very real. He is not a myth. He is a man who can walk into any home, on any street, and do the unspeakable. And then simply walk away. This story is not about one murder. It is about a pattern, a ritual, and it begins on a quiet, respectable street at 124 North Weber Street. This was the home of the Wayne family, a small, simple, and by all accounts, happy household. There was Mrs. May B. Wayne, the 50-year-old matriarch of the home, her 19-year-old son, Arthur C. Wayne, and a young boarder, a friend of the family, Miss Ida May. The man of the house, Mr. Spare, H.C. Wayne, was a railroad man who often worked late. On the night of September 19, 1911, Mr. Wayne returned home from his shift. The hour was late, and the house was dark, save for one detail that struck him as odd. A single kerosene lamp was left burning in the sitting room. It cast long, flickering shadows down the hallway. He called out. There was no answer. He walked through the silent house. He went to his wife's bedroom. What he saw in the dim yellow lamplight would shatter his world. May. Wayne was in her bed, but she was not sleeping. She had been murdered. Her skull had been crushed by a blow of unimaginable force. The weapon, the police would later determine, was an axe, and in a final, chilling act of either shame or ritual, the killer had pulled the bedsheets up, covering her face. Mr. Wayne, in a state of shock, stumbled to his son's room. He found Arthur. The same scene of butchery, the same terrible, crushing blows to the head, the same final, quiet act of concealment. The 19-year-old boy's face was also covered. In the third bedroom, they found Ida May. She had met the same fate, killed in her sleep with the same brutal efficiency. Her face, like the others, was hidden from the world. The police were stunned. This was not a crime Colorado Springs was familiar with. This was not a saloon fight or a robbery gone wrong. This was a slaughter. There was no motive. The house had not been robbed, money was left untouched. The women had not been sexually assaulted. This was murder for its own sake. It was an act of pure, distilled malice. The investigation was immediate and frantic. In the bathroom, they found the murder weapon. It was the family's own axe, which had been kept in the backyard. The killer had found it, brought it inside, and then, after committing 3 murders, he had taken the time to do something that chilled detectives to the bone. He had washed the axe. In the bathroom sink, he had calmly rinsed his victim's blood from the blade, dried it, and left it leaning against the wall. He had worked in the light of a single lamp, which he left burning. He had moved through the house with a ghost silence. And then he had vanished. The city was in shock, but a frightened public needs a suspect, and the police quickly found one, a man named Andrew J. Blixt. Blixt was a former boarder at the Waynes' home. He had also, it was discovered, boarded at a home directly next door to the Wayne residence. He was a known quantity, a little strange perhaps, but he fit the profile of a disgruntled tenant. It had to be him. It was a crime of passion, a personal vendetta. That was the only thing that made sense. The police arrested Blixt, but their case fell apart almost immediately. Andrew Blixt had an ironclad alibi. On the night of the murders, he had been miles away in the town of Salida, working. He couldn't have done it. The city and the police were back at square one. The murders were a terrifying, unexplainable one-time event, a horrible anomaly. They tried to move on. They tried to forget. And for 1 month, the city held its breath. Then, on October 19th, exactly 1 month after the Wayne murders, the boogeyman returned. This time, the house was at 730 North Custer Avenue, over 2 miles away. This was the home of the Burnham family. There was Alice C. Burnham, the 42-year-old wife and mother, her 12-year-old daughter, Nellie, and a 24-year-old boarder who was staying with the family, Mrs. May P. Smith. Once again, the man of the house, F.C. Burnham, was away. Once again, a silent predator, under the cover of darkness, slipped into a home full of sleeping women and children. The next morning, Mr. Burnham returned to his home. He found a scene that was a carbon copy of the nightmare on North Weber Street. His wife, Alice, his daughter, Nellie, his guest, May Smith, All of them were in their beds. All of them had been murdered with an axe. All of them had had their skulls crushed by a force that spoke of a chilling, detached strength. And just like before, the killer had performed his rituals. The murder weapon was the Burnhams' own axe, taken from their woodshed, and once again, it had been carefully washed in the bathroom and left behind. And, just like before, the killer had pulled the bedclothes up, gently, almost tenderly, covering the faces of his victims. But this time, there was a new, horrifying detail, a new step in the ritual. Every single mirror in the house had been covered. In the bedrooms, in the hallways, in the parlor, any reflective surface had been systematically draped with a sheet, a towel, or a piece of cloth. With this one act, the killer's profile changed completely. This was not a disgruntled boarder. This was not a robbery. This was not a crime of passion. This was a fiend, a human fiend, as the newspapers began to call him. The city of Colorado Springs dissolved into a state of mass hysteria. The city of sunshine was now a city of shadows, a prisoner of its own terror. No one was safe. If two separate, random families could be slaughtered in their beds, then any family could. Gun stores and hardware shops sold out of weapons, ammunition, and, most of all, new locks for their doors. Families huddled together in a single room to sleep, the father sitting awake all night, a shotgun across his lap. Vigilante groups and citizen patrols roamed the streets, seeing a suspect in every shadow, in the face of every stranger. The police were helpless. They were chasing a ghost. They had no motive. They had no suspect. They had no leads. All they had were the killer's chilling signatures, the washed axe, the covered faces, and the covered mirrors. And that last detail, the mirrors, that is what drove the city mad with speculation. What did it mean? Psychologists, both amateur and professional, flooded the newspapers with theories. Perhaps the killer was superstitious. Perhaps he was terrified of the old folklore that a person's soul, upon death, could be trapped in a mirror, or that the dead might rise and pull the living in. Perhaps it was a flicker of remorse, a terrible, human-like shame. He was a monster, but he was a monster who could not bear to see what he had done. He covered the mirrors so he would not accidentally catch a glimpse of his own reflection, so he would not have to look the boogeyman in the eye. Or, and this was the most terrifying theory of all, perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps it was simply part of his game. A flourish, a signature left by an artist who had perfected his horrible craft, a way of taunting the police, of telling the world, I am in control. I am methodical. I am not like you. The police, in their desperation, rounded up every vagrant, every gypsy, every stranger in town. They rearrested Andrew Blixt, their original suspect, convinced his alibi must be flawed. They grilled him, they pressured him, but they had nothing. He was released. They looked at a local man who had recently been committed to the insane asylum in Pueblo, but his timeline didn't match. They chased down reports of a blood-stained man seen boarding an early morning train. But the man was never found. The human fiend, whoever he was, had a pattern. He struck on the 19th of the month. The entire city of Colorado Springs braced for November 19th. They nailed their windows shut. They barricaded their doors. The city was an armed camp, waiting for a monster to appear. And then, nothing. November 19th came and went. So did December 19th. The fiend did not return. The killer, who had held a city hostage for 2 months, was gone. He had slipped into the city, committed 2 acts of impossible butchery, and then, like a phantom, he had dissolved back into the night. The case went cold. It remains cold to this day. But the story of the human fiend does not end in Colorado Springs. To understand who or what he was, you have to zoom out. You have to look at a dark constellation of murders that stretched across the entire American Midwest. Colorado Springs was not the first, and it was not the last. In September 1911, before the Wayne murders, two similar axe murders occurred in Paola, Kansas. In October 1911, just days before the Burnham murders, the same thing happened in Monmouth, Illinois. A family killed with an axe. The bodies covered. The killer seemed to be moving. And then, 8 months after he vanished from Colorado, in June of 1912, the boogeyman arrived in Villisca, Iowa. The crime scene in Villisca was a perfect, and even more brutal, echo of the Colorado Springs murders. The Josiah Moore family, a mother, a father, and their 4 children, along with 2 young girls who were sleeping over, were all found murdered in their beds. The weapon? An axe. The victims? All had their faces covered with bedclothes. The mirrors? Every mirror and reflective piece of glass in the house was covered with a cloth. The details were identical. The washed blade. A lamp left burning. A killer who had spent hours in the house, undetected. A predator who had slipped in, done his work, and vanished back into the rail yards. This was the terrifying truth. The human fiend of Colorado Springs was not a local. He was a traveler. He was a murder tramp, a transient killer who moved from town to town by hopping trains. He was a shadow who would drift into a sleeping city, select a house not for wealth, but for its perceived vulnerability, its quietness. He would find the family's axe in the woodshed because he never brought his own. He would enter the house, not by breaking a lock, but by walking through an unlocked door. He would move from room to room in the dim light of a single lamp, a silent, methodical reaper. And when his work was done, he would perform his rituals, wash the blade, cover the faces, shroud the mirrors, and then, before the sun rose, before the milkman started his route, he would walk back to the rail yard, climb onto a departing train, and disappear. This is why he was never caught. The boogeyman has no name. He has no address. He is just a shape in the dark. The 6 victims of the Colorado Springs axe murders were just 2 stops on a bloody, cross-country journey. The houses on North Weber and North Custer are long gone, but the story remains. It's a story that serves as a cold, permanent reminder. A reminder that the locks on our doors are just a suggestion, that the walls of our homes are just a thin barrier, and that the boogeyman, the real flesh-and-blood boogeyman, is always out there watching, waiting, and just deciding which house is next. Every state, every city, every town has a place the locals warn you about. A back road, a twisted ribbon of asphalt that cuts through the dark where the rules of the civilized world seem to dissolve. A road where your car radio cuts out and the air goes still, and you know, deep in the pit of your stomach, that you are not alone. In Colorado, that place is Riverdale Road. It's an 11-mile stretch of 2-lane pavement winding through Adams County, north of Denver, near the suburb of Thornton. By day, it's just a lonely route bordered by fields, farms, and sparse woods. But by night, it becomes a corridor of pure dread. It is, by common consensus among those who live near it, the most haunted road in Colorado, a magnet for tragedy, a collector of souls, and a place where the veil between the living and the dead is so thin you can reach out and touch the other side. The stories of Riverdale Road are not just one legend. They are a tapestry woven from tragedy, murder, suicide, and pure spectral malevolence. If you are foolish enough to drive it late at night, the first place you will look for is the ruin. They call it the Gates of Hell. The legend of the Gates of Hell is the foundational nightmare of the road. The story takes place at the northern end, near where the road dips into a grove of cottonwood trees. Here, decades ago, The exact time is always misty in a true campfire tale. There stood a grand, imposing mansion. It belonged to a wealthy patriarch, a man whose mind eventually frayed into madness. In a horrifying final psychotic break, the man locked every door and window, trapping his entire family inside. His wife, his children, and perhaps servants. The accounts vary, but the victim count is always high. He then set the mansion ablaze. As the house burned, he stood outside, watching his family perish in the heat and smoke, listening to their final, agonizing screams. Once the mansion was reduced to ash and the screams had died, he calmly walked back into the ruins to join his family. Today, nothing remains of the house except the blackened stone foundations and a massive, crumbling set of wrought iron gates that are forever locked. The gates of hell. Visitors claim that if you approach these ruins late at night, you can still smell the smoke. You can hear the sounds of a family crying, the faint, desperate pleas of children trapped in a final, agonizing moment. Some say if you drive up to the gates and flash your high beams 3 times, you will see shadows moving frantically behind the iron bars. They are trapped, forever reliving their final minutes, and their suffering has stained the very soil. But the gates of hell are only the beginning. The road itself is haunted by the victims of countless other, unrelated tragedies. One of the most persistent and detailed legends is that of the Lady in White. She is said to be the spirit of a young jogger or a bride, depending on the variant, who was struck and killed on the roadside or perhaps even murdered, her body left in the ditch. Story is tied to a specific area of the road, a particularly dark and desolate section where the trees arch overhead. The Lady in White appears suddenly, without warning. She is often seen standing on the shoulder, wearing a flowing, old-fashioned white dress that seems to glow in the darkness. She is sometimes seen wandering down the center line, staring blankly ahead. Drivers who have encountered her describe a profound sense of cold that washes over their car, even with the windows rolled up. The encounters are never violent, but they are terrifyingly real. Drivers swerve to avoid hitting her, only to realize the moment they pass that she has vanished. Others have seen her standing silently by their passenger side window as they drive past, her face pressed against the glass. She is eternally lost, forever trying to finish a journey that ended violently on that cold asphalt. If you escape the Lady in White, you may then encounter the Ghost Racer. This is a distinctly modern nightmare, a legend born of speed and aggression. The Ghost Racer appears as an old muscle car, sometimes a black Camaro, sometimes a stripped-down Charger that materializes seemingly out of nowhere, right on your bumper. Its headlights are blinding, aggressive, and its engine roars with a demonic challenge. The ghost car will tailgate you relentlessly, flashing its lights, pushing you to go faster. It wants to race. The legend is that the driver is the spirit of a street racer who died in a fiery wreck on that very road, forever seeking one last, deadly challenge. If you slow down, the spectral vehicle will speed around you, only to vanish into the darkness ahead. But if you take the challenge, if you push your car past the limits, the phantom muscle car will appear right next to you, matching your speed, and that's when you see the driver. He is a dark, indistinct silhouette, sometimes described as having a skeletal or mutilated face. And then, at the peak of the speed, he disappears. The engine noise cuts out, the lights vanish, and you are left alone on the black road, the silence more terrifying than the roar. The encounter often leaves drivers with the unshakable feeling that they only narrowly avoided becoming the next victim to fuel the Ghost Racer's eternal challenge. Beyond these main figures, the road is a repository of smaller, more insidious hauntings. There are the phantom handprints. These prints appear without explanation. Drivers, often after they feel they have had an encounter with one of the entities, will stop their cars only to find small, muddy, or dusty handprints smeared on their rear windshield or back window. But the disturbing part is that the prints are on the inside of the glass. The implication is clear. Something was inside the car with you, sitting silently in the back seat, watching you. The air itself seems to carry the sounds of the road's dark past. People driving through the denser wooded sections report hearing the sounds of a Native American massacre. Riverdale Road is built on what was, centuries ago, Arapaho and Cheyenne territory. The sounds are described as war drums, distant screams, and the frantic chaos of a battle that took place long before the road was paved. This suggests the horrors of the road extend far beyond the modern era, tapping into a deep, ancient layer of suffering. The atmosphere is often described as oppressive and suffocating. Drivers report the distinct smell of wood smoke, even on clear nights, a memory of the burning mansion. They also report the sickly sweet odor of decay, a sudden, overpowering wave of rot that passes through the car, even with the air vents closed. The legends even tell of a ghostly figure often seen walking along the railroad tracks that border a section of the road. A man with a hat, endlessly pacing, always walking away from the approaching car. This is said to be a hobo ghost, the spirit of a transient who met a lonely, violent end in the shanty towns that used to line the tracks. A ghost tied forever to the means of his travel. But perhaps the most terrifying element of Riverdale Road is the psychological effect. People driving the road often report sudden and inexplicable malfunctions of their vehicles. Headlights flicker and die. Engines stall without reason. Cell phones lose all service. The radio, no matter the station, suddenly hisses with white noise, and within that static, some claim they can hear clear, disembodied whispers, too faint to be understood, but too close to be ignored. This is the road's way of trapping you. You are isolated. You are alone. And if your car stalls, you are forced to wait. Stranded in the dark, where the lady in white might finally finish her jog right beside you, and where the echoes of the mansion's final screams can be heard in the silence. Riverdale Road is more than a haunted spot. It is a convergence point. Every tragic accident, every desperate suicide, every cold-blooded crime that has occurred in its long, dark history seems to have left a residual echo, a psychic scar on the land. It's a road that doesn't just pass through the landscape. It passes through time, and it passes through the veil. For those in the know, the warning is simple, timeless, and deadly. Avoid Riverdale Road after dark. The price of curiosity is far too high, because once you drive it, you are not just a traveler. You are a captive. And you will never look at a dark, empty road the same way again. There are some places on this earth that are simply wrong. From the surface, they might look beautiful. They might be places of laughter, of sunlight, of community. Places where people jog on winding paths, where families spread blankets on green grass, where a grand white pavilion, built of Colorado marble, stands elegant and serene against a backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. This is Cheeseman Park in Denver, Colorado, an 80-acre jewel in the city's urban landscape. But this beauty is a lie. It is a thin, green veneer stretched over a wound that is never healed. The grass is green because it is well watered, but it is also fed by what lies beneath. The laughter of children playing on the lawns echoes in the same space where the dead were desecrated. And the grand pavilion stands not as a monument to civic pride, but as a marble mask built to hide a history of greed, disrespect, and unimaginable horror. Because Cheeseman Park is not a park. Not really. It is a mass grave, a poorly hidden, badly plundered, and deeply haunted mass grave where an estimated 2,000 bodies still lie, unmourned and unmoved, just inches beneath the soil. This story begins not with a ghost, but with a promise. In 1858, the city of Denver was barely a year old, a rough and tumble gold rush settlement. Its founder, General William Larimer, set aside a 320-acre plot of land on a high, windy hill east of the city. He called it Mount Prospect Cemetery. It was to be a beautiful, dignified final resting place, high enough to be seen from all around. The promise faded almost instantly. The land, it turned out, was not Larimer's to give. It was, by treaty, Arapaho land, and even after the U.S. government claimed it, the cemetery was never a place of peace. It was a place of grim necessity. The first burial, or at least the one that set the tone, was in 1859. A Hungarian immigrant named John Stoffel, in a dispute over gold dust, shot and killed his brother-in-law. With the nearest official court in Kansas, the frontier town formed a people's court and promptly convicted Stoffel of murder. He was hanged from a cottonwood tree. Then, in an act of grim frontier practicality, he and his victim were unceremoniously dumped into the same grave at Mount Prospect. An auspicious start. This was the cemetery's true legacy. It was not a place for the wealthy or the loved. They would later be buried in the new, manicured Riverside Cemetery. Mount Prospect became the boneyard. It was a dumping ground for the city's unwanted, the criminals, the vagrants, the paupers, the victims of disease. A handsome and popular gambler named Jack O'Neill was gunned down outside a saloon in 1860 and buried there. The cemetery soon earned a new, sarcastic nickname, Jack O'Neill's Ranch. The westernmost edge, the Pauper's Field, was known simply as Boot Hill. The land was unkempt. It was a desolate, wind-swept hill of cacti and sagebrush. A report in 1866 noted that a cabinet maker named John Wally, the aspiring undertaker, had done a terrible job of keeping records. Graves were unmarked, headstones were toppled and vandalized. Prairie dogs burrowed in and out of the burial mounds. In a final act of indignity, cattle were often allowed to roam free, grazing among the dead. To make matters worse, a pest house was established just south of the cemetery's Jewish section. This was a quarantine hospital for smallpox victims. It was a place where the sick, the elderly, and the contagious were sent, effectively, to die. When they did, they were buried in the adjacent Potter's Field, often in mass graves. By the 1880s, the city of Denver was growing up. The frontier town was becoming a metropolis, the queen city of the plains. And the city's new elite, building their opulent mansions in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, were furious. Their beautiful, expensive homes looked out directly onto this. This eyesore, this derelict, weed-infested necropolis. It was a blight, an embarrassment. And so, the city's powerful began to lobby. This land was too valuable for the dead. It should belong to the living. On January 25, 1890, the U.S. Congress authorized the city to vacate Mount Prospect and convert the land into a park. It would be named Congress Park. The city issued an ultimatum. Families were given 90 days to remove the remains of their loved ones. Those who could afford it, those who had families to claim them, were moved. The Hebrew Burial Society and the Catholic Church, which maintained their own sections, Mount Calvary, began an orderly, respectful relocation. But what of the others? What of the thousands in the Potter's Field? The criminals? The vagrants? The solitary prospectors and the smallpox victims? What of Jack O'Neill and John Stoffel? They had no one. They were unclaimed. And as the 90-day deadline passed, more than 5,000 bodies remained, forgotten, in the ground. The city had a problem. It needed to clear the land, and it needed to do it cheap. In 1893, the city of Denver awarded a contract to a man who would become the central villain in this entire sordid affair, an undertaker named Edward P. McGovern. McGovern was not a man of sentiment. He was a man of cold, hard arithmetic. He was paid $1.90 for each body he was to box and transfer to the new Riverside Cemetery. That's $1.90 per body, and he quickly, unscrupulously, realized how to make a much larger profit. The gruesome work began on March 14, 1893. It became a public spectacle. Reporters, city officials, and morbid curiosity seekers gathered to watch the exhumations. For the first few days, the work was orderly, but McGovern was losing money. The task was too slow. So, he changed his methods. He stopped buying full-sized adult coffins. They were too expensive, too bulky. Instead, he ordered child-sized coffins, wooden boxes no more than 3.5 feet long. The math was simple, and it was monstrous. When his workers unearthed a full-grown, decomposing adult, they did not respectfully transfer it. With shovels, with axes, they would subdivide. They would break the bodies apart, hack off limbs, snap spines, and cram the pieces into the tiny boxes. The scene, as reported by appalled onlookers, was something out of a medieval nightmare. Drunken workers, covered in filth, would rip open the rotting caskets. Sometimes, a body was surprisingly intact. They would break it. Sometimes it was just a skeleton. They would shatter it. They mixed the remains. The bones of 3 or 4 different people would be stuffed into a single child's coffin. This wasn't just efficient. It was profitable. A single 6-foot-tall body, dismembered and packed into 3 separate small boxes, would net McGovern 5 paws, 70, triple the original fee. The work was a chaotic, ghoulish rush. Body parts and bones were strewn everywhere. Tattered shrouds and fragments of clothing were left on the field, trampled into the mud. And the chaos attracted predators. Souvenir hunters would swoop in, sifting through the open graves, looting the coffins for jewelry, for gold teeth, for anything of value. One of the gravediggers, a man named Jim Astor, was known to be one of these looters. The story goes that one evening, as he was bent over a coffin, pockets full of stolen trinkets, he felt an immense, icy weight land upon his shoulders. He felt a presence, an intelligence, crushing him. He dropped his shovel, ran from the cemetery screaming, and failed to return to work the next day. He knew what he had felt. It was the anger of the dead. The Denver Republican newspaper finally got wind of the full, horrific story. Their March 19, 1893 headline screamed, "The Work of Ghouls." The article described, in graphic detail, McGovern's practice of hacking up intact remains, the stench of decomposition hanging over the city, the open graves left to fester. The public was horrified. This scandal was immediate. The city, in a panic, fired McGovern and canceled the contract. But now, they had a new, and even more horrifying, problem. The field was a scene of total desolation. It was a battlefield of the dead. There were thousands of bodies still in the ground, and now there were hundreds more that had been dug up, partially dismembered, and left exposed in their shattered coffins. One grave was reportedly left with the casket lid shattered, a partly decomposed man staring, open-eyed, at the sky for 2 weeks. The city had no more money and no more will. The project was a catastrophic failure. So they made a decision that would seal the fate of Cheeseman Park forever. They gave up. They ordered the workers to simply stop. They didn't rebury the open graves. They didn't fill the empty holes. They just stopped. In 1894, they began the park project. They brought in plows and graded the entire field, plowing under the remaining graves, the open caskets, the scattered bones, and all. For years, the land sat empty. Open graves remained, slowly filling with rainwater and weeds. It wasn't until 1902 that the city planted trees and shrubs, many of which were planted directly into the collapsed grave sites to hide the depressions in the earth. The land was a scarred, ugly secret, and it needed a mask. That mask came in 1907. A local tycoon, a deeply unpopular water and real estate baron named Walter S. Cheeseman, had died. His family, eager to repair his reputation and ingratiate themselves with the city, donated $100,000 for a grand pavilion to be built in the center of the blighted park. In 1910, the Cheeseman Memorial Pavilion was completed. Designed by Marian and Norton, it was a stunning neoclassical temple of white marble. The park was officially renamed Cheeseman Park. And with that, the city's greatest act of desecration was successfully, beautifully covered up. The lie was complete. But the dead, do not forget. They were never meant to be parkgoers. They were meant to be at rest. And the estimated 2,000 who remain, they are still there. The hauntings at Cheeseman Park are not the aggressive, jump-scare hauntings of a movie. They are pervasive. They are profound. They are, above all, unendingly sad. Almost immediately, as far back as 1893, residents in the new mansions that bordered the park began to report visitors, sad, confused-looking spirits dressed in old-fashioned or tattered clothes would be seen standing on their lawns. Some would knock on windows, or even on back doors, before vanishing. They were spirits of the displaced, seemingly lost, looking for a way home. Visitors to the park, especially at dusk, report an unshakable feeling, a profound, crushing melancholy that settles on them for no discernible reason. They hear disembodied whispers, the sound of a woman weeping, or, most commonly, the distant, faint sound of children crying when no one is there. Paranormal investigators have captured countless EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, when they ask, "Who is here?" The recorders, on playback, are filled with voices. "We're all here," says one. "Left," says another. "Help me," says a third. The land itself seems to hold the memory of the graves. In very dry weather or after a light dusting of snow, the grass browns or the snow melts in a specific rectangular pattern, revealing the outlines of the hundreds of coffins just below the surface. People who have laid a blanket on the grass to relax have reported standing up to find the clear, depressed outline of a human body in the fabric beside them, as if an invisible and very heavy person was lying right there. The land that became the Denver Botanic Gardens on the old Mount Calvary section is no different. It is, perhaps, even more active. The gardens were built directly on the old cemetery, and staff there have long known the land is haunted. They keep a logbook at the front desk for visitors and staff to record their paranormal experiences. The entries are chillingly consistent. The smell of cigar smoke in the Japanese garden when no one is smoking. The feeling of being followed. In the old Waring House, which now holds offices, staff report that a non-functional original intercom system will suddenly buzz to life. One visitor in the logbook wrote, "Outside the carriage house, I saw a mist swirling up from the raised garden bed, like a young child turning in a dance." When the Botanic Gardens built a new parking garage in 2008, the work was abruptly halted. The excavation had unearthed pioneer-era graves. The bodies were there, just as they had been left. The hauntings are not just in the park, they're in the culture. The famous 1980 horror film, The Changeling, was directly inspired by these events. The writer, Russell Hunter, claimed he moved into a house just north of the park in the 1960s and experienced terrifying phenomena. Doors opening and closing, inexplicable cold spots, and violent crashing noises. He claimed he found a hidden journal from a man who had lived in the house, a man who had murdered his own child. The house, in the movie, is even called the Cheeseman House. The past is not past in Cheeseman Park, it is present. To this day, every time a new irrigation line is laid, every time a tree is planted, workers are braced for what they will find. In 2010, workers digging a trench for a new water line unearthed 4 complete skeletons, buried in the pioneer-era style. They were left just as McGovern had left them, until a shovel blade finally brought them to light. Cheeseman Park is a beautiful place, but it is a beauty built on an act of profound violence. It is a monument to a city's ambition and its absolute, callous disregard for the dead. The joggers, the sunbathers, the families at play, they are all, in a very real sense, dancing on the graves of the forgotten. And the forgotten are still there. They are waiting, they are watching, and they are weeping. They are the permanent residents of the park. A lingering stain of sadness that no amount of green grass or white marble can ever cover up. The mountains of Colorado rise up, unforgiving and sublime, against the blue expanse of the sky, and nestled high in the Estes Valley, a jewel box against a backdrop of raw, terrifying wilderness, sits a monument to impossible ambition, American ingenuity, and the deepest, most pervasive kind of dread. This is the Stanley Hotel, a colonial revival masterpiece, a beacon of Edwardian elegance, and, for more than a century, a documented playground for the dead. It is not just a haunted hotel. It is the ultimate, perfect haunted hotel. It is the place that gave the world The Shining. The story of the Stanley Hotel begins not with a ghost, but with a necessity. The year was 1903. Freeland Oscar Stanley, a brilliant inventor and the co-founder of the Stanley Motor Carriage Company, the famous Stanley steamer, arrived in Colorado. He was not there for gold. He was there to die. Stanley was suffering from a life-threatening case of tuberculosis, and the best treatment available was the clean, crisp, dry air of the Rocky Mountains. He settled in Estes Park, and miraculously, the air worked. He didn't just survive, he thrived. His health returned completely. Overjoyed and grateful, Stanley vowed to give the town a gift. He and his wife, Flora, were accustomed to the luxury and sophistication of East Coast society, and the rugged frontier town of Estes Park offered none of it. So, Freeland Stanley decided to build a place that would bring the grandeur of the East into the wild heart of the West. In 1909, the Stanley Hotel opened its doors. It was a marvel, one of the first hotels in the world to be fully electrified, complete with elevators, ensuite bathrooms, telephones, and a fleet of Stanley steamer automobiles to ferry guests up the mountain. It was an extravagant, isolated palace built on sheer will and innovation. But the mountain has its own will, and the moment the hotel opened, the spirits began to check in. Freeland and Flora Stanley themselves are said to be the most persistent and perhaps the most benevolent ghosts. F.O. Stanley, a man of order and enterprise, is often seen near the billiard room and the front desk. Guests and staff have reported his apparition standing over the pool table, watching the game, perhaps checking to ensure all is running smoothly. A favorite spectral prank attributed to him involves lights flickering or objects mysteriously moving in the front office, as if the old engineer is still tinkering with the wiring. His wife, Flora Stanley, is known for her love of music. F.O. gifted her a beautiful Steinway grand piano in the hotel's music room, and she played it constantly. To this day, when the music room is locked, empty, and silent, guests in the adjacent rooms or the main lobby will sometimes hear the faint, clear sound of a piano playing classical music. A melody will stop abruptly, and the room will return to silence, confirming that Flora is still performing her nightly recital. These are the founders, the happy ghosts, returning to the place they loved best. But the Stanley Hotel is vast, its history long, and not all of its residents are happy. The most famous, most sought after, and most thoroughly haunted room in the entire hotel is room 217. This room holds the dark heart of the Stanley Hotel's legend. A tale that predates Stephen King's visit and involves the hotel's first recorded tragedy. In 1911, 2 years after the hotel opened, a massive storm knocked out the electricity. The head chambermaid, Elizabeth Wilson, was making her rounds, lighting the auxiliary acetylene gas lamps with a candle. As she entered room 27, an unknown gas leak in the room ignited. The resulting explosion was massive, rocking the hotel. Elizabeth Wilson was blown clear through the floor into the McGregor dining room below. Incredibly, Ms. Wilson survived, suffering only 2 broken ankles. FOO. Stanley, true to his word, covered all her medical expenses and ensured she had a job for life. She worked at the Stanley Hotel until her death decades later. Today, room 217 is her domain. Elizabeth Wilson is a very specific type of ghost, a fastidious, proper Edwardian maid who has very strong opinions about her guests. She has a particular aversion to unmarried couples sharing a bed. Multiple guests. Unmarried couples have reported an inexplicable cold spot forming between them, and the distinct, jarring sensation of an invisible force wedging them apart in the middle of the night. It is the ghost maid, ensuring decency is maintained. Her most famous activity, however, involves the clothing and luggage. Single male travelers often report waking up to find their suitcases unpacked, or, more commonly, their clothing neatly folded and put away in the dresser drawers while they slept. She is still tending to her rooms, still caring for her guests, even if those guests have checked out of the mortal world. And it was into this legendary room, on the very last night before the hotel closed for the winter in 1974, that author Stephen King and his wife Tabitha checked in. They were the only guests in the enormous hotel. King described the atmosphere as a place where the emptiness itself felt menacing. He and Tabitha ate alone in the vast dining room, surrounded by empty tables with their chairs stacked high, listening only to recorded orchestral music. After dinner, King wandered the silent, endless corridors of the 4th floor. That night, King experienced the nightmare that launched his career into the horror stratosphere. He dreamt he saw his young son, Danny, running through the hotel halls, looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide, screaming, being chased by a predatory, coiling fire hose. He woke with a violent jolt, sweating, the entire plot of his next novel, The Shining, fully formed in his mind. Though the film version famously used room 237 and a different hotel exterior, the true spirit of the Overlook Hotel, the suffocating atmosphere of a grand structure consumed by the evil it was built on, was born in room 217 of the Stanley Hotel. Beyond the founders and the legendary maid, the Stanley Hotel's most active area is its notorious 4th floor. Originally, this entire floor was used as the servants' quarters and an open attic, and it is here that the hotel's most disturbing energies converge. The 4th floor is primarily haunted by spectral children. Guests constantly report the sound of giggling, small footsteps running down the long, empty hallways, and the sound of children playing at all hours of the night. If guests look, they find nothing. These are often described as residual hauntings. The echoes of children who stayed here long ago, whose joyful energy became permanently imprinted on the floorboards. However, some encounters are far more interactive. Room 407. This room is said to be haunted by Lord Dunraven, the Anglo-Irish nobleman who owned the land before F.O. Stanley. He appears to female guests, often standing by the bed, and sometimes makes his presence known by tapping on the windows or causing loud, sudden noises. Guests have reported feeling an icy hand caress their cheek or a cold weight settling onto the foot of the bed. Room 428. The spirit in this room is often described as a friendly cowboy who has been seen by multiple guests, sometimes sitting on the bed. Though generally polite, this spirit is known to cause objects to fall and to move furniture. But the creepiest detail is the reports of phantom footsteps coming from the ceiling, even though room 428 is the highest room on that wing. The sheer volume of sightings and encounters has led many paranormal investigators to hypothesize that the grand staircase in the main lobby acts as a spiritual conduit, a kind of portal or vortex, allowing spirits to pass freely between the hotel's floors. Many photographs taken of the staircase have captured blurry, translucent figures, often appearing in old-fashioned clothing, ascending or descending the stairs. The lower levels and the detached buildings hold their own horrors. The concert hall, a grand venue built after the main hotel, is considered one of the most haunted structures on the property. It is home to Lucy, a spirit often associated with the basement area who is said to be the ghost of a runaway or a former employee. Guests visiting the concert hall report feeling their clothes tugged, seeing unexplained shadow figures, and hearing disembodied voices or full conversations, often from decades past, echoing through the empty auditorium. And the basement, the utilitarian, earthen-floored underbelly of the hotel, is a terrifying labyrinth of stone walls and old machinery. It is the perfect stage for the classic cellar horrors, full of cold spots, unexplained growls, and the profound, certain feeling of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. The Stanley Hotel stands today, a century later, embracing its dark legacy. The ghosts aren't just a part of the history, they are the main attraction. The hotel plays The Shining on a continuous loop on one of its television channels. It has a hedge maze, built purely in tribute to the film, and offers popular ghost tours day and night. The Stanley is a place where the veil is not merely thin, it's practically transparent. A place built on a mountain's will, a man's ambition, and a disaster that opened the doors to something beyond this world. It is the Overlook, made real, waiting for its next permanent resident to check in, and perhaps never check out.